Hi, I'm Brad in Trees with Gertens, and I was just going to give you some good ideas on how to take care of your trees this spring.
One of the first questions we have is about crab apples. Is it too late to prune someone's crab apple tree?
Not just yet. You can still do some pruning. If you do a little bit of pruning right now, I would only recommend up to a third of the tree, ideally just the lower branches. If you wanted to do any more extensive pruning, I would maybe wait again until next year, around late winter to early spring. So anywhere between February and early April is the best time.
Perfect. And if someone has dead branches on their tree, is there a best time of year to take those off, or any time?
Any time is going to be perfectly fine to remove any sort of dead branches. Dead branches can lead to things like, rot, funguses, diseases that can spread. So the quicker you take them off, the less of a likelihood you have of anything like that spreading.
Perfect. If someone sees nibbling on newly planted trees, are they going to be okay? Is there anything they can do?
Ideally, what you're going to want to do in that case is you're going to want to identify exactly what the pest is that is really targeting your tree. If the case is some sort of mammal, which we tend to see a lot this early season, I would highly recommend this product. It's called Repel-X. It's a capsaicin based product. It's entirely plant based, and long story short, it basically makes your plant spicy. So do not use this on anything you would eat.
And then that product is okay in gardens and lawns?
Correct.
Anywhere?
Yep, capsaicin is absolutely 100% organic. It's just sourced from, anything in the Solanaceae genus.
Perfect. How thick should I place mulch around newly planted trees?
So what we usually recommend is a minimum of 2 to 4 inches, but you want to make sure that you have a gap of about 6 to 12 inches from the base of the tree to the edge of your mulch. What that is going to do is that is going to reduce the likelihood of any sort of new roots forming and potentially girdling the tree as it grows. The mulch should then extend about 1 to 3 feet out from the base of the tree. Ideally, in a perfect world, you'd be able to extend that mulch bed all the way to the drip line of the tree, no matter where the drip line of the tree is.
And then you touched on this a little bit, but placing mulch around the trunk of a tree,
yep.
How could someone go about that? Are there any do's or don'ts?
Yep, just make sure you have a gap of, like I said, that 6 to 12 inches. If you put any sort of mulch in there, you want to make sure it's a very thin line that's just barely covering that soil.
Why is that important?
Generally speaking, if you have a really thick layer of mulch, it actually triggers the tree to start growing subsurface roots. And a lot of times what will happen is those subsurface roots, since they're not very strong, once they hit the edge of something that's harder, compacted soil on the edge of the newly planted hole, or if you have a rock bed or even other plant root systems, they'll start to circle instead of pushing through that, and from there you're going to get girdling, which is going to really shorten the life of your tree.
Some people were asking about fertilizing trees. Do you have any recommendations?
Yep, so a general slow-release granular fertilizer is going to be best. You can apply a little bit now, and then you can apply a little bit later at the start of summer. I would not do any fertilizing after that unless you wanted to do a very low nitrogen content fertilizer in the late fall. If you do a high nitrogen content fertilizer in late fall, you just run the risk of keeping the tree awake for way too long, and then it'll freeze out and die.
With last year's drought, some people are worried about their newly planted trees. Should we give any extra water this season?
Absolutely. Usually for every inch of caliper that a tree has after a drought, it takes as many years in order to fully recover from that drought. So a 3-inch oak is going to take roughly 3 years to fully recover. Ideally, the best way to do this is to take into consideration size of your tree, species of tree, and your soil composition. If you have something like a heavy clay-based soil, you're going to want to use a lot less water than you would if you have a very sandy soil. Ideally, you're going to be basing this off of the exact size of the tree. Generally speaking, what I go with is for every inch of caliper, you're going to want to give the tree about 5 gallons of water on a very slow drip for about 20 to 30 minutes at a time. Easiest way to do this, put your garden hose at the base of the tree, turn it on a very slow trickle, just put a timer on for about 30 minutes or so, and then you can turn it off. You'd want to do that about once a week unless it rains. If it does any sort of raining, don't bother watering that week.
Perfect. On the topic of disease, are there any diseases that people should be watching out for?
Yes, early spring is usually a good time for diseases and funguses to get started. Things like anthracnose, so like leaf spot is going to be one of the big ones in the early season. Otherwise, you'd be looking at things like oak wilt, which is obviously going to affect oaks specifically. Otherwise, just other fungal infections of various natures are going to be what you want to look for. So any sort of wilting leaves, any sort of spots on your leaves, any sort of, discolored bark, things like that is what you'd be wanting to watch for.
And if someone thinks one of their trees has a disease, can they bring in a picture and show it to one of our team members?
Yep, absolutely. Anybody in our tree area is going to be able to identify it, and if they aren't able to, we'll be able to get a few people together and we'll diagnose what's wrong with your tree for you.
Perfect. Cheryl from Facebook asked about planting a new oak tree and crabapple tree last fall. What special care should they take this spring?
So generally with any newly planted trees, you're going to want to make sure you remulch them every year. The mulch, as it breaks down, is really going to give the microbes in the soil the energy that they need to help break down a lot of the macronutrients that the trees themselves can't break down. As those macronutrients are broken down, the trees will then be able to absorb that and they'll be able to live healthier lives. Other than that, just make sure, like I said, early fertilizing in the spring. If you wanted to do any sort of trimming, you'll want to do that probably within the next week or so. And then that watering schedule for this season is going to be very important. But just make sure you're not overwatering.
And if someone does have newly planted trees, how long should they leave them staked for?
At least 1 year, minimum 6 months. Ideally, after 6 months, you would just want to take the stake off, check the progress of the tree. If it looks to be where you want it to be, you can remove the stake. If it's anything less than ideal, just put the stake back on and let it stay for another year.
And do you have any recommendations for the stakes?
Yes, so any of the heavy-duty tree staking kits are going to be ideal. They have, it's going to be easier here, they have a plastic stake, so this is actually going to not rot, it's going to have a lot longer life to it. The inside is going to have the cut rubber hoses, so that'll go around the nylon roping, and the nylon roping is going to be highly resistant to any sort of wind damage.
Perfect. And then a little bit more about products. Do you have any recommendations for the products behind you?
Yes, so if you're looking to just take off a few smaller branches, things like that, just a pair of your normal garden shears is going to be more than enough. If you're wanting to go with something a lot heavier, a nice saw is going to be ideal. Just make sure you get that cut as nice and flush as possible, but not all the way up to the trunk of the tree. Make sure you leave about 2 to 3 inches of that branch left on that tree.
Perfect.
And then don't cover that tree cutting with anything. Leave it open to the air. I do not recommend putting any of the wax on it.
Perfect. Some people were asking about salt-tolerant boulevard trees. Do you have any recommendations?
Yes, so alders are going to be very salt tolerant as well as drought tolerant. Coffee trees would be another good option. Honey locust, service berries, bur oak and red oak specifically. Those are all going to be really good options for anything that you'd want to put on your boulevards.
Perfect. Another question from Facebook. Cheryl asked about the white plastic deer guard on her trees. Should she take those off?
I wouldn't recommend taking them off just yet. I would wait probably until after Memorial Day to do it. That way you're avoiding, a lot of the hungrier animals like the deer and the porcupines, squirrels, bunnies, etc. that are still looking for food before anything really starts growing for the season.
Gotcha. A question about ash trees. I have an ash tree and I'm afraid I have emerald ash borer. What do you think for treating that tree?
Generally speaking, if you believe you have emerald ash borer, the best thing to do is going to be to get a professional out to diagnose it 100%. There are some signs you can look for the emerald ash borer. Usually you're going to see a very erratic new growth in the tree, so a lot of times the tree that would normally look perfectly healthy will start to sucker from the bottom, or the canopy itself will be very sparse in some areas and very thick in others. Generally speaking, a healthy tree is going to have overall very widespread new growth. If you happen to notice any bark sloughing off or any bore holes, that's going to be a very good sign as well. If the tree itself is any more than 50% damaged from emerald ash borer, best thing to do is just cut your losses, get it removed. Anything less than 30%, absolutely salvageable. Just make sure you get somebody out sooner than later to get it treated. If you're between that 30 and 50%, It's kind of a toss-up. It really comes down to the individual tree and how resilient it is.
Perfect. And did you have any final tips, tricks, or products you want to give out?
Nothing off the top of my head. All I have to say at this point is if you do have any questions and you come in, just anybody in the tree barn can help you out. Just make sure you ask whoever you see, and we'll do our best to give you some good advice.